Let's talk Claude Code. So, you've probably noticed if you've been anywhere near LinkedIn right now, it kind of looks like this. It's like it's all Claude Code, and I am not helping. I am part of the problem here, as you can see. Also talking about Claude Code, and if you haven't tried Claude Code, you might be like, "Ah, yeah, but really, what's going on? Why do we care? Why is everyone talking about it?" I mean, obviously, a part of this is just social media kind of echo chamber reinforcing things. But I think there is something genuinely kind of interesting or distinctive happening here. And it's pretty recent, right? It's happening since kind of like maybe middle of November. So this is a trend or a new way of working that's happened in the last 3 or 4 months. Um, and I'd say, Claude Code is now the tool that I spend most time on. It's not email, it's not Google Docs, it's not a spreadsheet. It's Claude Code for almost anything I do. Um, and to give you a sense of like stuff I am doing myself, I am on the kind of non-coding side, writing side. I have my daily to-do list there. I have a weekly review. I'm writing event listings and show notes for webinars like this. I'm writing proposals for customers and managing my sales pipeline. I'm doing all of our kind of internal strategy docs and planning and things, at least assisted by Claude Code. And in terms of building stuff, I'm not just kind of building little bits of personal software and little side projects. I'm completely replatforming the Hustle Badger site onto React using Claude Code. And that's, I do not have a development background. I did not take a computer science degree. So that's a fairly like that is all kind of a new kind of space that I feel comfortable doing in the last 2, 3 months. I've built us a new admin interface, which has saved us a bunch of time. I've built us a new kind of microservice for certificates, which also saves us a bunch of time. These are real kind of production changes to, Hustle Badger is a small company, right? It's, employs a few people, but these are real kind of production changes that we are making to that site. And other people will have other stories. I wanted to talk from personal experience on this, on some of the stuff that I'm doing. Why is that so different? Well, let's talk a little bit about the experience between ChatGPT and Claude Code. And here, I'm using Claude Code. I'm using ChatGPT to mean, LLMs in general. So are you using ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude? It's all the same. I'll explain a little bit more what I mean by Claude Code in just a moment. So, when I was using ChatGPT, which I used a lot, then if I was going to do something like write a LinkedIn post, I kind of obviously put a lot of time and effort. If any of you follow me on LinkedIn, I spend a lot of time on that. Um, as AI tools have emerged, I started getting support from them. And so what I used to do on ChatGPT is have a think about a topic I haven't posted on recently, right? Maybe go to Hustle Badger and be like, oh, wait a sec, I've written an article for this. We've got kind of a couple of articles on this. I'd have to print them as PDFs so I could then upload them into ChatGPT. I might, if I had any previous posts on Hustle Badger, I might copy the text or screenshot the previous posts. I drop all of that then into a custom GPT I would build, and then I'd get like a starting point or a draft or some thoughts on what I could do for my next post. So that would be kind of like a way of just kind of pulling context together and helping me pull together an outline. With Claude Code, I literally go in at the beginning of the day and I say like, what are we posting today? Or I just have a slash command, which is a kind of a shortcut, which effectively says that. And then I've already told Claude what is the process that I want to go through, where it basically says, okay, we're going to search the entire back catalog of stuff that you've talked about ever on topics. We're going to look at all your recent calls you've had with people where you've been coaching them. We're going to look at all your previous LinkedIn posts. And then we're going to see what you haven't talked about for, 3, 4 months. Then we're going to come up with what we think is going to be an engaging hook. And I'll write out the structure based on, Claude will write out the structure based on all my notes and all the Hustle Badger content. And then when I kind of give it a little bit of input, it's then going to kind of come up with a post that I can write. So from ChatGPT, you can see that it's the same kind of process that you're like putting together different context. using all the information that we've got. In ChatGPT, this is very, very manual. In Claude, this is all basically automated, and Claude sticks it all together. And because it sticks it all together against the process that I've defined, I end up updating it like every week or every couple of days, where I'm like, oh, actually, a better way of doing the hooks would be this. And so I feed that into the process and I'm updating the process, which with ChatGPT, I'm just kind of going through the same thing every day and kind of like, I have to do the process so I don't have that thinking time or space to actually improve it. Um, so that's the experience. It's a little, I have to admit though, as with a lot of things that you experience, going to a rock concert, going surfing, this is quite difficult to understand or get a sense of if you just haven't tried it yourself. Like I can describe to you what surfing feels like, but you're not really going to get it unless you actually go and catch a wave yourself. Same with Claude Code. This is a sort of I can try and get you some of the way there, but you need to have a little bit of a play around to experience it for yourself. Let's talk a little bit about what we mean by Claude Code, though, because when people say Claude Code, sometimes they mean like literally Claude Code in the terminal. This is where Claude Code started, I think about a year ago now, as the terminal is this command line interface, which if you're not a developer, you've probably never gone anywhere near, but it is a sort of under the hood way of doing things on your computer, running commands, like almost down at the most fundamental level that you can get. And so developers use it a lot to, set up local servers so they can run, code that they're building locally. Um, but this is not a very friendly interface. So this is kind of like the original version. And when people talk about Claude Code, they might be talking about that. But they might also be talking about kind of any Anthropic product, basically, where they're saying, oh, I use Claude Code to do this. And actually, that what they mean is they use the Anthropic, the Claude Desktop App. And then maybe they were on the chat tab, or maybe they were on the co-work tab, or maybe they were on the code tab, but they got Claude to do it. Or maybe they're talking about something even kind of broader than that, where they're saying, oh, I got Claude Code to do it. But actually, what they mean is they used an Anthropic foundational model like Opus 4.6, but they're using a completely different wrapper. So they're using an IDE like, it does an integrated development environment like Cursor or Anti-Gravity or VS Code. And they might even be using like Codex, but just saying, oh, I use Claude Code for this because Claude Code is becoming, the word for working agentically in the same way that ChatGPT is the word for chatting with an LLM, even if you're using a different LLM. That is probably a little bit confusing. So I will pause there if you have questions and you're like, wait, what? For the purposes of this talk, we're really talking about this kind of third broadest definition. Using Claude Code, how do you get started on Claude Code means like, how do you start working with any one of these agentic wrappers, whether that is the Claude Desktop App, whether that is an IDE like Cursor or Anti-Gravity, or whether, in fact, you want to go all the way and use the terminal version. Because the point is not really the tool, the point is the capabilities you get with that tool. Let me explain this in a slightly different way. So when you use an AI chatbot like ChatGPT, you've got you, the user, and what you're doing is you're speaking to a web interface. And I'm going to use Claude here as an example rather than ChatGPT, just so you can see which bits are the same and which bits are different. So say I'm on the web, I open the browser, I go to claude.ai, and I can chat in the browser window and say, hey, give me some ideas for things I can make for dinner. Great. What that web page is then doing is it's sending an API call to an Anthropic foundational model. So maybe that's Opus 4.6, maybe that's Haiku, maybe that's Sonnet, whichever kind of weighted model I want. Great. And then it's going to give me a response. And it's going to tell me the answer to my question. As we all know, that's pretty useful already. That is kind of like what using AI has meant for the past 2 years. And recently, you're starting to see like more kind of you can inject more context into this web interface. So we can upload documents, or we can put in screenshots and upload them to the web interface. And that's kind of went through the example there of, if I download a Hustle Badger article, or I screenshot it and put it into Claude, then Claude knows what's in that article. And in the last few weeks, you can start to kind of connect some apps directly into the web interface. So, but that I almost kind of regret putting that on, because it's going to make things more complicated. Basically, it's just you chatting through a web interface to a foundational model. When you're speaking through Claude Code, and again, using Claude Code in that kind of broad sense here, what you've got is not a web interface, but you've got effectively a wrapper that is an application in its own right on your machine. Now, that wrapper is still connected to the same foundational models that you get on the website, on the web version, right? So you're still calling Opus 4.6, you're still calling Sonnet, you're still calling Haiku, whatever you're doing. But because this is an app on your computer, it has access to all the files on your machine. So any local files you created, it can see those. You don't need to upload those one by one. It just sees them, right? You can connect it to lots of different apps. You can use MCPs if you're familiar with that. Otherwise, but you can connect it to your calendar. You can connect it to your email. You can connect it to Granola for transcripts like Notion. So any information that's in any of those systems, it can also see. And you can also get it to write little scripts or pieces of code that work on your machine as well. So if there is, you want a little script that resizes images, you don't need to kind of send each one of those images to Anthropic for it to do that, right? You could just build a little script that kind of does that on your machine, and then Claude will know to do that on your machine. So what this means is that, here on the left-hand side, when I'm using kind of a web interface, I'm very much asking a question and getting a response. With the right-hand version, when I'm kind of working agentically, what I'm doing is I'm giving a task to my app. I'm saying like, hey, I'd like to do this. And it is then going and pulling the context from all over the place and figuring out how to do that. So it's much more like delegating something and then coming back to me with an answer. And the other thing that you'll see is like these apps, they're much better at kind of like, they'll put a request into the foundational model, they'll come back and they'll be like, okay, but have I actually answered the question that the user had? And if not, do I need to make another API request to the foundational model and ask a slightly different question? So they will kind of loop through how many API requests they make to Anthropic. That obviously has a cost implication as well. Cost of using these tools is driven by the amount of context you give them and the model that you use. So if you're using a heavyweight model, which I would generally recommend, because you get the best results, and you're using all this context from like local files, other apps, local code, and then you're making multiple requests to a heavyweight foundational model, that's going to be really, really expensive. So that is why if you're using like the free model or a kind of $20 a month kind of pro account on the web interface, you're quite quickly may well find yourself running out of credits. Not to put you off and say you shouldn't try it, but just to warn you that, like, don't be surprised if that happens. Okay, so if that's kind of like what it looks like behind the scenes, or kind of structurally, what can you actually do with it? I described a little bit, some of the things I can do. I wanted to give a sense of some of the capabilities it's got that you wouldn't get with ChatGPT. First one here, skills and slash commands. So these are saved instructions for how to do something. So imagine if you write a really long prompt saying like, hey, I want to do this thing, and you need to go through these steps, and then you need to do X, Y, Z, and you put a load of context into the web version. You could save that as a custom GPT, right? Or you could just save that in a Notion folder somewhere where you can just copy paste it across into your web folder. In Claude Code, what you do is you save that first as a skill, and Claude will basically have keywords for it, and it will be like, oh, you mentioned that you want to do competitor analysis. Um, I know when you mention competitor analysis, the competitors you care about are these three competitors. Great. So I'll go and do competitor analysis on that. So, it will basically kind of recognize from what you ask it that sometimes it should do things according to the instructions you've given it. A slash command is then when you explicitly tell it, hey, you've got to do this thing in the way that I said it. So it's not picking it up from the keywords, you're kind of like noticing you're talking about a particular thing. It's you've literally defined a slash command with, like slash competitor analysis. Whenever you start putting that in, it auto completes and it will then follow a set of instructions exactly. So that's really, really powerful for getting it, more consistency and better quality and what you want to do. And as I say, like those instructions, you just naturally end up kind of updating over time to improve the results. So it ends up compounding a little bit. Next thing worth talking about is like MCPs or model context protocols. So this is a way of connecting apps um, into Claude Code. So I mentioned, your calendar, your email, Granola. If you're using the Claude Desktop app, then I've got my Google Drive connected, I've got Granola connected, I have Gmail, Google Calendar. Um, this is like a game changer for me because it's the difference between, oh, I want to write a proposal, and apologies, I know most of you are probably product managers, but I'm like a small company founder, so I'm using small company founder kind of things. I have to write a proposal for a client. Great. I used to have to upload the template and dig out the call transcript or relay the kind of meeting notes from someone I'd spoken to. Now I can basically just tell God, hey, I just had a call with someone. Can you write a proposal for them? It'll be like, okay, you talked about a call. I'll go and check Granola. Okay, you just had a call with this person. Right. I'll go and check your emails. Oh, you already talked to them about this. Great. I now know from the skill that I should write a proposal and here's the template. It will just do all this stuff kind of back to back. So the MCPs, the power of this is that, again, you get better results out of your agents when they know kind of the amount that you know and the amount that you know has better overlap. And the MCPs give them access not just to files, but to all these other tools that you're probably using on a regular basis. And if you want to connect, there's probably connectors for Jira, Linear, Dovetail, all these services are starting to open up a little bit so that you can access them from Claude Code. I mentioned local files. This is one of the really foundational things because the Claude Code is like, it's an app on your machine. It can see your local files. It can read them. It can write them. That means it can also create kind of instructions for itself that are persistent. This isn't like a web interface where every chat is fresh, basically, barring a little bit of memory. This is really like, hey, I can document like what we're doing in a project. I'll write it up as a spec. I'll save it. And you shut down your computer, you come back the next day, it just reads the spec and it's like, all right, this is where we got to, and it can get going again. Multiple conversations. I mean, this is something you can do on the web, but people probably don't do enough. But now, I regularly have 2, 3 conversations going on at once because anytime I set Claude Code to do something, it's going to take a few minutes to kind of, go and do all its stuff, get all its context, work out what it's doing, start executing. I'm not just going to sit there kind of watching the screen while it does that. Actually, I'm going to move on to another task and I will come back when it's finished. So that means I kind of parallel processing a few things. Note to you all, that is not, I mean, that has its downsides. Let's be really honest about it. The human brain can only have so many different things going on at once. And you probably want to have like, really restrict the number of conversations that you're doing at one time, because otherwise you'll be like a busy fool dashing between conversations, trying to remember what you told your agent to do, getting half-baked results out of Claude Code and not really making any kind of meaningful progress. So do take it with a pinch of salt when people are like, oh, I've got like 6 tabs open, I'm doing all the, I mean, like, yeah, sure, buddy, but we're all humans here. Let's be a little bit realistic about what you can get done. Sub-agents. So as well as having skills, that you say like, hey, this is the way that I want you to do things, you can also set up a sub-agent. So a sub-agent is it's almost like setting up a different persona of Claude. So you could have an agent that is your, um, you know, naysayer, basically, and you're going to give that agent the instructions that you're always going to look for the counter arguments or the counterfactuals or the risks in this. I just want you to kind of like blow holes in anything I say, right? So you set that agent up. Now, from any conversation you're having, you could then call that agent effectively to chip in. And the benefit of having that as an agent rather than a skill will always be kind of in the conversation thread that you're in and will therefore have all the context and the vibe of the conversation that you've been having. When you call in an agent, it's effectively kind of like sandboxed a little bit. It has its own context window, so it can go and do tasks on its own. But also, if you want it to take a very different approach to something, a specialized view, it's going to do that. And browser access. Um, And this is, I first gave, the first tool I gave browser access to was anti-gravity. So that's Google's IDE, which is an amazing tool. And I really recommend that to people if you want to go the kind of IDE route as well. Um, it was the scariest permissions pop-up I ever saw because it was basically, hey, anti-gravity can do anything on your browser. It can read and write anything. It can impersonate you. All your data is at risk. We're responsible for nothing. I was like, wow, okay. So do I want to do that? And for whatever reason, I was feeling gung ho. I was like, sure, fine, let's just do it. Let's see what happens. And the next thing, like, I was like, oh, anti-gravity, I want to build this thing. It built the website. And then suddenly the browser was opening. Like, I had not touching my computer, the browser's opening, and it's like loading up the web page, and it's then clicking through the website, testing what it's built itself in a way that I can view it. And I was just like, I mean, that is amazing and cool and terrifying all at once. So many emotions all in one. So that is something else that these tools can do. All of these things, I have to say, like, you can kind of switch on and off these things. You don't have to go like all in on all of them. Um, okay. So like, I think of this coming back here. This is almost like I feel like the Lego bricks analogy is overused, but these are your Lego bricks, and you can kind of assemble them in different ways, right? So um, these are very kind of flexible, powerful components. And when you start combining them together, you can then do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. You like each one of them though is quite useful just in its own right, and you don't need to kind of be like cutting edge influencer who's kind of like got this all hooked up. You can just use one or two of these, and it will feel pretty wonderful. Okay, so we've talked a little bit then about what are the different options here. And you're like, yeah, okay, but where do I get started? Um, there are basically four options I would think about. So you've got Claude.ai, like the web version. Um, you've got your desktop app from Anthropic, your kind of Claude desktop app. You've got a number of different IDEs like Cursor, Anti-Gravity, VS Code, or you've got the kind of terminal version of Cursor. The first question to probably ask yourself is like, well, what are you spending money on already? Or what do you already have access to through work? As I say, these can get very expensive. So if you have a company account for any of these things, you should definitely use that to start with, right? If you are not tied to a particular ecosystem, either emotionally or financially, then you've got a little bit more options, right? And so I'd say like you can then think about how far down which of these you want to go to. I kind of put together this comparison of all these things you can do, mainly to show you that the web version, you could ignore this. This is not really agentic working. Claude Code in web, I mean, it's just Claude, right? It's just the web version. You really want to be on like the desktop app, the IDE, the terminal version. These are a little bit different, but also this is really like evolving very, very quickly. So don't worry about this too much because whatever I tell you is going to be out of date next week. And all these features are clearly have lots of value and they're getting rolled out in as many places as possible very, very quickly. So Your basic trade-off looks a little bit like this. Oh, that is not the right title for this slide. Anyway, so web is the easiest, but also least powerful. Terminal is the most powerful, but also the least easiest. Um, you're like, okay, this isn't helping. Which one do I pick? Okay, if you've never picked up an IDE before and you don't care about the ecosystem, go for Claude Desktop App and use Cowork. If you're tied into the ChatGPT ecosystem, use Codex, which is their version of the desktop app. If you're already using an IDE, like Cursor, like Anti-Gravity, you can just stick with that. Or if that's something you want to play around with, you can stick with that. If you don't know what an IDE is, go with the desktop app. Okay. So, but again, like I saw this with the prototyping tools like Lovable, Figma, Replit. A year ago, everyone was like, "But which one do I pick? You know, Lovable or Replit or Figma Mate?" I mean, it doesn't matter because it's commoditizing as a software class. There are differences, between these at the moment, but these are getting kind of like smoothed off very, very rapidly because basically everyone sees where the future is, and it's kind of it's agentic working generally. It's not any particular class of tool, and it's going to look something like the desktop app, but some kind of evolution of that. So don't worry about it too much. Start from where you are and kind of move incrementally. You can also transfer, right? Because all the instructions, all the connectors, yes, it's a little bit of a faff to update this, but this is not that much work. So transferring between tools, if you start in desktop and then you're like, no, 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 this isn't working. I want to go to an IDE or I want to go to a terminal. It's fine. Um, Claude can help you with that. Okay, let's talk a little bit prerequisites though, because these, actually getting set up. Because if you haven't touched any of these things, I want to kind of talk through that as well. So Claude AI, there's none. Right, you go to the website, you set up your account, you're away, easy peasy. On the desktop, you just need to download the desktop app, and for Cowork and for Claude Code, those kind of tabs, you will need a pro account as well on Claude, or the equivalent on ChatGPT if you're using Codex. And you're going to have to download the IDE for Cursor, for Anti-Gravity. The terminal, you can install it via terminal. I mean, again, if you're comfortable using terminal, you're probably not on this call because you've already figured it all out. But like, if you're like, oh, I do want to use this and I am comfortable with terminal, I just haven't got around to it, like you can do it that way, and you can find instructions for doing it on terminal fairly easily by googling around. I mean, I literally updated this slide like this morning because you did have to download Node.js for the IDE in the terminal, and this is no longer a requirement. So this is also just getting kind of the edges smoothed off it quite quickly. Okay, once you've downloaded it, you've got up and running. What is then? I'm going to talk about this in a little bit of depth. Like the folder you're in is going to matter because that determines how much Claude can see of all your local files. So in the web version, it can't see any local files, right? But you can manually upload files one by one by clicking the little plus sign. That's effectively the equivalent on the Claude version. On the desktop, you're going to see there's a little kind of select folder, and you have to remember to select that before you start the conversation. In the IDE, usually when you open the app, it'll say like, hey, which folder are we working in, which repo are we working in, because you can also work directly with GitHub repos, and that's where you're going to be. And in terminal, you're going to have to use the terminal commands, cd, folder name, folder path, get into the folder that you want to use. Starting Claude, I should say this. I mean, like, really, this one only kind of applies to terminal in a way because, on the web, I mean, the web page is loaded. You're in Claude, right? Like, you open the app for the, these kind of desktop apps. For terminal, once you've installed it via the terminal command, you're literally and you're in the folder, just type Claude and you will get the kind of little Claude bot, Claude, I don't know, orange gremlin pop up, and you go from there. So, and then it will ask you for your kind of API keys for Anthropic because you do need a paid account for Anthropic to use the terminal version. So let's talk a little bit more about folders, because I feel like if you've downloaded one of the apps and you've got into a folder, you're starting to kind of make some progress, and you should then already start to see the value over a web version. The thing to remember here when you're setting up your folders is, as I say, it's kind of Claude is going to see everything in the folder that it's in and below. So the way I set this up is basically is a little bit of hassle because I'm sure, like most people, I was used to working in the cloud. I can share my files with my co-founder and all of our colleagues. Like, why do I want stuff locked on my machine? I don't really. But as soon as I start working agentically, actually the kind of the cost benefit changes slightly, and I do want it on my machine. So I've had to pull a lot of context locally onto my machine. Just start with one folder and then just build from there as you kind of, you use it. But I've basically divided stuff into kind of, code and non-code. And inside, the non-code stuff, the business folder, I've then kind of broadly kind of, split that out by different functions, different things, logical categories. Like what makes sense for you or what, is going to make sense for you. So don't worry about this too much to get going. You can change everything around as you go along. If I start Claude in, say, the marketing folder, it's only going to see the files in the marketing folder. It's only going to see the instructions, like the skills and instructions that I've set in the marketing folder as well. So this means it's got the least context, but it's faster and it's cheaper. If I start Claude in the business folder, it's going to see everything in the business folder and all the instructions there. More context, a little bit slower, a little bit more expensive. And if I go to Hustle Badger, then it's going to see everything in the Hustle Badger folder, and it's going to be quite slow and quite expensive. And I'd say if you are doing coding and non-coding work, then I think the split between sort of your knowledge work and your coding work is valuable because there's so many lines of code in your code folders that you don't want them in your context window because that's going to bloat your, it's going to bloat your costs and everything. So again, I wouldn't overstress this. You're like, oh, but do I? I mean, aim for the middle, roughly. For 90% of tasks, I just kind of stick it in the kind of at the business level, kind of middle level. That is fine. Do invest in getting some kind of context locally because that is what is the kind of fundamental step or foundational step for getting any value out of any of these tools. There are a few kind of hacks if you want to work with colleagues. So you can either set up your folders to sync with Google Drive, or you can set them up to sync with GitHub and just run it as a usual repo. So get that kind of middle context there going. Once you've got that there, you're already going to start to see some of the benefits that I've talked about, and you can kind of build on. But in terms of sort of like next steps, once you've got that kind of basic set up, I would connect some MCPs because again, that's a really fast way of giving Claude Code more context. In the desktop app, that is sort of as easy as kind of flicking on these different switches and authenticating via Google. If you're using an IDE, it's a little bit more involved, right? So you're going to have to, depending on which IDE you're using, you're going to have to look at how you do that. But worth spending a bit of time to do that. Absolutely. And the thing after that, I would say, is go and build some slash commands. So just notice what you're using Claude Code to do, and anything that you're doing, multiple times a week, define a slash command for it, right? And you do not need to write that all out yourself. You can basically say to Claude, like, hey, can we convert this to a slash command? I want to document this as a skill. Let's talk about the way we just did it. You literally that you've just had a conversation about doing something, be like, can we save this way of working as a skill? Can we save this as a slash command? Great. And something to think about there is like skills can reference other skills. So you can think about chaining these together in quite powerful ways. That has been, sorry, I've been completely ignoring the chat, having told you to ask questions, which I will now come on to in just a moment. Before I get onto the questions, I am going to give a quick shout out for our Claude Code course. This webinar is designed so that, yeah, if you just want to get going, you can get started, and you can basically feel your way out from there. And there are tons of free resources on the internet. However, if you really want that support of someone to help you through this, if you want to be kind of exploring with a peer group for accountability and problem solving and getting inspired about what the use cases are, this cohort kicks off in a couple of weeks. And so we go through not only kind of getting you set up, but also writing your first commands and instructions, setting up a proper personal operating system. So a compounding system that helps you work day to day, and also building things, building websites, local scripts with Claude Code as well. Um, this is like the third AI course that we've got. We've got a couple of other ones on building AI products and writing evals, and also um, AI prototyping and using all sorts of different agent building tools as well, which is our kind of more general build with AI course. So I just kind of mentioned that there. That said, let me look at the chat, as I know you've got a bunch of questions. So Erin is asking, can you have access to the slides? I'm going to put the recording of this on YouTube. Um, and if you're already on YouTube watching this, check out the show notes for all these links. But a bunch of links there for where you'll find this, and where you'll find future talks and so on. Uh, Right. Rogier is asking, any IDE you recommend? So I think for me, I've tried Cursor and Anti-Gravity myself. I think they're both excellent options. Cursor, because there's a free tier and then there's a $20 tier, so you can get going kind of quite cheaply, and it does everything you want. Anti-Gravity by Google, I think it's just a really nicely put together product. Um, it does, Anti-Gravity obviously locks you into the Google ecosystem a little bit more. Um, but I would try one of those to start with. Gregory's then asking, for those of us that are cloud native for documents, how do you configure them to be available in Claude? Yeah, I mean, this is the problem, right? Like someone is going to crack this, and it's probably going to be Microsoft or Google because they are the ones that are really invested in cloud working. But at the moment, people are basically using workarounds. So the way to do a workaround here is, yeah, get your Google Drive synced to your local drive via Google Drive, and then work on the local files and let them sync back to Google Drive. Um, I know that is like feels a bit awkward, but again, because the history of where these tools have come from, they've come as coding tools where the model was you have a repo on GitHub, you download the repo to your local machine, you make your edits locally, and then you merge them back up to GitHub. That is kind of how they work at the moment. And we're going to have to wait a bit for that to be kind of like truly collaborative cloud-based working. Okay. Any other questions? I think that was it in the chat. But if I've missed something, then please do let me know. Do I use the terminal option? Yeah. Maybe we'll go back to some of these options. Go back to one of these nice slides. Okay, so I actually use almost all of these, sometimes on the same day. I think that's the other thing, is that the more that you play around with these, the more you realize they're kind of similar, but you do appreciate the nuances. The more you're going to be like, oh, it's fine, I'll just do this in so and so. So the desktop app, which I generally recommend, I mean, it's a really new product. What are we now? End of March. It's been out about 6 weeks, something like that, or 8 weeks. I mean, like we're counting in weeks, like single digit weeks it's been out. It's pretty buggy, certainly the co-work side. So it's pretty buggy. Some stuff that you feel like really should work does not always work. Um, so that's very frustrating. And sometimes I do go to the terminal version because I'm like, it's ugly, but I know exactly what it's going to do. And any limitation that I hit there is like, it's a limitation of the foundational model. It's not a limitation of the wrapper. Whereas sometimes I kind of get a little annoyed with the desktop version. Um, and similarly, yeah, the desktop apps are great, but one thing they don't do very well at the moment is allow you to preview the files you're working on. Whereas IDEs, you almost have side by side your chat conversation and then the file that you're working on. And so that can be really nice as well. So I kind of pair the desktop app with Obsidian quite a lot because it's a free markdown file viewer. I mean, that's the other thing is you have to convert all your files to a format that foundational models can read. So markdown is really good for that. So I use Obsidian and Claude Code at the moment, but again, you could just use an IDE. That I think once you are terminal seems very scary to get going with, but if you get, you could get the web version to talk you through how to set up Claude Code on terminal, and it will give you the commands to kind of copy paste into terminal. And if you commit to kind of spending an hour or two doing that, actually you'll probably be away. Like, so it's quite like a steep kind of like step to go from like web or desktop to terminal. Seems very intimidating, very different interface. But once you're over that hump, it's fairly sensible. How well does Claude handle and protect sensitive company data? I mean, this is something you should investigate yourself with your IT department because you're still pushing. If you go back to these diagrams, you're still pushing information to a foundational model. So, depending on how your company thinks about security, like they might not be comfortable with that. Yes, you can switch off training and you can do all that sort of stuff, but all your data is still going to, some massive data center in wherever that is owned by Anthropic, and you may or may not be happy with that. Tanya is asking, I've accessed local synced files with Copilot before. Is this the same? I think the question is like, are you getting the results right? So I mean, I don't use Copilot day to day, I should say. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but my sense is from hearing people talk about it secondhand that this is quite a long way from this kind of experience that you're getting in Claude Code at the moment. That is going to improve over time. And if Copilot is the only tool that you can use, then it is what it is, right? That you might want to do it, see what you can do on a kind of your personal machine. I would really be looking for these kinds of features to get added into Copilot though, and exploring them as they appear, because they will appear in Copilot for sure, because they're so valuable. It's just a question of when and how well Microsoft does it. So this is a question of like, yeah, you are going to get it eventually to some degree. You know, if Claude Code is the Slack here, you're going to get the Teams version. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up then? Great. Well, good luck with it, everyone. Hopefully, this is enough to get you started on Claude Code and demystify things a little bit. If you do need any more help, drop me a line on LinkedIn. Check out some of the other videos we've got on Claude Code that go a little bit further. Or, as I say, join that course and we will sort you out. Have a great evening, everyone, and we'll speak soon.